Good evening and welcome to yet another episode of the Windy City Fantasy Football Show. You'll notice things are a little different, and you'll notice there's a couple people missing, but there is some good news. We got the trophy fixed. So, future winner and owner of the trophy, you will have a complete trophy for the 2022 season. Now, with that being said, this week is playoffs, start of the playoffs. So let's take a look at last week's results and see who is in and who is out. Okay, we had a number of games that were going to decide that final playoff spot because we were assured at this point that Austin, Carson, and Sue were locks to make the playoffs. So the results of their games would not affect their standing. Now, the last spot was between Soldier Fields, Herbert's Heroes, and Stafford Infection for whoever won and had the most points. So, going into last week's matchups, the Ineth Krakens defeated I Gotta Win 167.7 to 86.84. Jameson was the high score of the week. Breeze is the Word defeated Lamar the Merrier 125.22 to 115.66, assuring Sue a spot in the playoffs. Stafford Infection defeated Herbert's Heroes, a score of 137.2 to 97.02, which unfortunately essentially stopped Sam from making the playoffs. Defonte's Infernjo won a barn burner against Chicago Mama Bear. The score was 143.2 to 141.06. Very, very close. And again, did not affect Austin's standing in the playoffs. And finally, TaylorMade defeated King Henry 138.34 to 99.42. And then in the final game, Soldier Fields defeated What the Heckler 113.218 to 92.3. Now, with that said, that puts the final spot between Stafford Infection and Soldier Fields. So whoever had the most points scored by this time of the season was going to make the playoffs. And when the numbers were counted and when everything was said and done, Soldier Fields had more points, and Soldier Fields sits into that fourth spot of the playoffs. So if we are looking at the standings for this final run, the number one seed in the playoffs is Defonte's Infernjo, the record of 11-4 in the regular season. Second place, Breeze is the Word. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to hang on because of that ridiculous game streak that Defonte's Infernjo went on. But Breeze is the Word finished at a mighty 10-5 on the regular season. Third place was King Henry, who finished 9-6 in the regular season. And with the final win, Soldier Fields ended their season at 9-6 to make the playoffs. The consolation ladder of games, we'll get into that in this week's matchups. But now, we need to take a look at some coulda, shoulda, wouldas. There weren't as many coulda, shoulda, wouldas this week just because of the situations everybody found themselves in and what the implications would be for the playoffs. But there were 3 of note. 3. King Henry had Deontay Johnson, I can't talk, who had 20 points on his bench. Chicago Mama Bear, we know she lost a nail biter to Devontae's Infernjo, and she had Jawan Johnson, tight end for the Saints, who scored 22.7 points on her bench. And the third and final player was Jerick McKinnon on my bench, who scored a whopping 34.2 points. Ridiculous. But with all that said, those were the only coulda, shoulda, wouldas of the week. We will have to check out now what did... I think it's Jen's favorite segment right now. Feels kind of weird not doing it with her here, but let's go to Booms, Busts, and Big Outs. All right, so the Booms for this week, pretty standard starting off. The Boom quarterback of last week was Josh Allen. He scored 35.86 points in that game against the Dolphins. The running back boom of the week was Jerick McKinnon, who scored 34.2 points on my bench. But the wide receiver boom of the week was definitely not on the bench. He was in the lineup for the Ionith Krakens. Zay Jones scored 37.9 points for the Jacksonville Jaguars. For tight ends, a familiar name, George Kittle was the boom tight end of the week with 25.3 points. Now, we all saw the debacle in Indianapolis, I believe, the game between the Vikings and the Colts, where Matt Ryan now has the dubious recognition of being the quarterback that gave up the biggest lead in the Super Bowl and gave up the biggest lead in the NFL regular season. It was a pretty ugly game for the Colts in that second half. But their kicker, Chase McLaughlin, well, they're probably laughing at them. He scored 21 points. Now, here's the kicker. Boom defense of the week, the Indianapolis Colts, who had 18 points in fantasy football and yet gave up the largest lead in NFL regular season history. Fantasy football is an odd beast. Well, we've gone through the booms, and now, unfortunately, we got to go look at the busts. The bust QB of the week was Justin Herbert, who managed only 8.72 points on the week. Running back Miles Sanders for the Eagles only scored 1.9 points due to injury. Maybe. The wide receiver was actually Kadarius Toney. He scored 1.2 points. But because I'm doing this, the bust of the week was Alan Lazard, the Green Bay Packers. He scored 1.7 points. How disappointing for the Green Bay Packers. The bust tight end of the week was the Steelers' Pat Freiermuth. He got a big old goose egg. He scored 0 points on last week's games. The bust kickers, and I say kickers because there were 2 of them that tied, Justin Tucker, the Baltimore Ravens, and Harrison Butker of the Kansas City Chiefs both only managed to score 3 points last week. And the bust defense special teams of the week belong to the Buffalo Bills, who only managed to score -2 points. Now, big outs. Something that we've been doing over the last couple of weeks. The big one is starting quarterbacks. These are the teams that are going to be working with backup or third-string quarterbacks going into this week. The Cardinals, the LA Rams, the Baltimore Ravens, the New York Jets, the Philadelphia Eagles, and the Tennessee Titans. All going into this week without their starting quarterbacks. Now, of note, that would mean that Jalen Hurts is going to be out this week with a shoulder injury. Lamar Jackson is still dealing with that knee injury and has been ruled out for this week. And Ryan Tannehill has been ruled out for this week with an ankle sprain. And the only really big out of note besides those three players is Chris Olave of the Saints. He has a hamstring problem, so he won't be playing this next week. Well, with booms, busts, and big outs out of the way, now we're looking at this week's matchups. As far as this week's matchups go, we've got folks on the consolation. We've got Herbert's Heroes taking on Stafford Infection again, 2 weeks in a row. The Eineth Krakens will be taking on Chicago Mama Bear. What the Heckler will be facing Taylor Made. And Lamar the Merrier will be taking on I Gotta Win. And for the playoff bracket, the number 1 seed, Devontae's Infernjo, will be taking on the number 4 seed, Soldier Fields. The number 2 seed, Breeze is the Word, will be taking on the number 3 seed, King Henry. Obviously, the winners of those 2 games will move on to the championship game to see who will get their plaque for 2022 right here. I can't drop the computer. I could put it down, but I'm not going to. Right here. Well, seeing as how we don't have Allen here, we really can't do what Allen says. But next week, we'll try and calculate his yearly record to see how he did with his picks. I'm optimistic that he actually did a pretty good job, but we'll see. And that leaves us with games of note for this week. And let me tell you, this week is different. With it being Christmas on Sunday, a majority of the NFL football games this week will be played on Christmas Eve Saturday. 11 total NFL games will be happening Saturday this week. So make sure you get your lineup set before Sunday. Sunday, we will have 3 games, however. There'll be the early game, Packers versus Dolphins. The afternoon game, Broncos versus Rams. And the Sunday night football game will be the Buccaneers versus the Cardinals. And the Monday night game will be LA Chargers versus the Indianapolis Colts. We're really getting some great primetime games this part of the time of the year, aren't we? Well, just on a little bit of a side note, for those of us who live somewhere where you don't get to see your favorite team play, good news! DirecTV no longer will have NFL Sunday Ticket. That lovely feather in the cap is now going to YouTube. So starting next year, you'll be able to get your NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube. You don't have to be a DirecTV subscriber. And with this being week 16 of the NFL season, I know we've got only 4 teams that are playing for anything other than pride, but that means we only have a handful of games left of this regular season where, well, most of our teams are going to be done too. We do have one person in this lovely group who has a team that'll be marching into the playoffs this year. Congratulations, Craig. Your Philadelphia Eagles are looking to take the number 1 overall seed in the NFC. So good luck to them in the NFL playoffs and hopefully the Super Bowl. And with that said, that's pretty much it. I hope that this wasn't as boring as I feel like it is, but if nothing else, Merry Christmas, everybody. Have a wonderful holiday season, and we will see you next week. Bye-bye. I wonder how long I'm going to shake my hand before I get up and turn off the camera. Can't do two things at once. Goodbye.